How's it going, my rustic bakers? Hope your day's going nice so far. Welcome back to another video. Today I'll show you to make a beautiful ciabatta style loaf. So let's get in the kitchen and get started. You can't go wrong with ciabatta, and if it's chunky like this, it's all the better. This is another updated recipe from the old days of the channel. Once again improved and simplified. It's a lean dough bread, which is super easy to make, and it's an absolute beauty in my eyes. It'll be perfect introduction for anyone who hasn't made ciabatta yet. Making one giant one is easier than making a bunch of small ones. Of course, you don't need to be a novice to enjoy a recipe such as this one. For my experienced bakers, you can customize this recipe to your taste. Change the flavor and texture by substituting some whole wheat flour or rye flour, or throw in some seeds in there perhaps. I'll leave all those decisions up to you. This plain white chunky ciabatta is already very good. So let's get on with it. Let's see what we need to make this. It is a lean dough with no special ingredients. All we need is some white bread flour, yeast, salt and water. There are countless breads that you can make with just these ingredients. As for the equipment, we'll need a tray with some non-stick paper, bowl, scales, a dough scraper, a temperature probe, something to score the loaf with. You can use a razor blade or a sharp knife to give it a good chance of rising, and to develop a beautiful rich crust, we'll need to spray it down with water. Steam is essential for the bread baking process here. Okay, let's get to mixing the dough. It all begins with temperature control. My kitchen was around 21 degrees Celsius or 70 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm using water that's 25 degrees Celsius or 77 degrees Fahrenheit. We are going to do cold bulk fermentation, so we don't want this dough to be too cool. It is of course going in a cold fridge, but it doesn't mean that the dough can be cold. Fermentation won't happen if it's not at the correct temperature. So we still need to pay attention to temperature control, even though we're fermenting it in the fridge. Right, dissolve the salt and yeast in the water, add the bread flour, mix it to a dough. This dough has a hydration of 70%, so it's a little bit sticky. Wet your hands with water when handling it to prevent the dough from sticking to them. Give it a quick temperature check after mixing, then cover it up and pop it in the fridge to cool down for 30 minutes. Cold fermentation will improve the flavor greatly. It will also improve the texture, and it will make the crust darker and more crispy. It is the superior bread making method. After 30 minutes of chilling, remove the dough from the fridge and give it a fold. Folding serves a bunch of purposes, and I've spoken about them countless times. You can find full videos about that in the Principles of Baking playlist and in the Steps of Baking playlist. The dough is still sticky at this point, so to perform the fold, wet your hands with water, release the dough from the bowl, pick it up in your hands, fold it down and push it back up into the middle whilst going around a circle. Once the dough ball is nice and tight, place it back into the bowl, cover it up and leave it for the long cold fermentation of 18 to 24 hours. And it should look kinda like this on the next day. The next step is pre-shaping. Right now the gluten is completely relaxed, which means that the loaf wouldn't keep its shape very well. We need to build some tension back into this dough. Dust it with flour, release it from the bowl, place it on the table with the smooth side down, stretch it out, and then give it a few folds. First fold the top third down, then fold the bottom third up, then cross the two sides over in the middle, and then repeat the first two steps. Fold the top third down and fold over the bottom third too. And just a few folds later, we have a nice bouncy piece of dough. Dust a little bit of flour on the table, place the dough with the seam side down, cover it up, leave it to rest for 30 minutes. After the resting stage, we can move on to final shaping, which when it comes to ciabatta is a very simple process. All we need to do here is to trim off the edges. Of course, normally ciabattas are made in batches. You would trim the edges of a large piece of dough and then cut that into portions. We are making just one here. The trimming is there for the aesthetics. Arrange the trimmings on a piece of baking paper and place the loaf over them. As the dough proofs and bakes, they will fuse together. You can make several loaves by multiplying the recipe, in which case you will end up with fewer trimmings, but that's okay. I will leave it for the final proof uncovered. We want the surface to dry out a little bit. The final proofing time will be about 1 hour. Towards the end, preheat the oven to 220 Celsius 430 Fahrenheit fan on, or 240 Celsius 465 Fahrenheit fan off. Now at this point I decided to use my baking steel, so I preheated that too. The reason why I want the dough to be a little bit drier is to make it easier to slash. A razor blade will be the best tool for the job, but a sharp knife will work too. Specifically a serrated knife, like a bread knife or a little tomato knife. But if you're a seasoned baker, I'm sure you have some razor blades at home. Okay, one last thing before we bake. Let's spray this thing down with water. There are of course other steaming methods, and you can find a full video about them in the Principles of Baking playlist. Okay, this thing is ready for the oven, so let's get it in there. At this high of a temperature, it'll take only about 20 minutes to fully bake. You can of course bake it on a tray, but I always have this steel in the oven, so I might as well use it. It does help to bake the bottom crust a little bit better, especially because my oven doesn't have a bottom heating element. So if I can bake beautiful breads like these ones in a piece of junk oven, then you can do it too. And there you go, that's how you make a beautiful giant chunky ciabatta. I like this straight edge rectangle look, and the scoring line down the middle. It turned out very beautiful in my opinion. But this video turned out a little bit short, so I decided to make another bread using the same dough. So here's a second recipe for you. The formula is the same. It's flour, water, yeast and salt. The fermentation times are the same. I mixed the dough, I popped it in the fridge for 30 minutes, I gave it a fold, then I cold fermented it for 18 to 24 hours, then I pre-shaped it, I left it to rest for 30 minutes, and now I'm doing the final shaping. Here's where things change. We're making a batard. Flatten the dough, then cross the two top corners over in the middle. This will create a pointy bit at the top, fold that down. Then turn the dough 180 degrees and repeat the same steps on the other side. And then you will end up with two pointy bits on either side. Stretch them out and cross them over in the middle too. Then dust your hands with flour and roll the thing into a tight loaf. It will be proofed in a proofing basket or banneton. Usually people sprinkle flour in the basket to prevent the dough from sticking to it. I prefer to give the dough a thick coating of flour and then placing it in the basket. This allows me to use pretty much the right amount of flour every time. The loaf goes in the basket with the seam side down, then it gets covered and proofed. Also for 1 hour, same as the ciabatta. If you don't own a proofing basket, you can use a cake tin lined with a kitchen towel, or shape the loaf into a bowl, a round shape, proofed in a bowl. I will use my cast iron combo cooker for baking. Again, you can just as well bake this on a tray. But before you bake it, invert the loaf on a piece of baking paper. Brush off any excess flour, slash it with a razor blade, and then spray it down with water, just as we did with the ciabatta. You can use the same dough for making so many breads. It would work just as well for baguettes, pizza, crusty rolls, or even pita. The only differences would be in the shaping and the baking. And when it comes to the difference between the ciabatta and this loaf, using this baking vessel, the baking time will be longer. I baked it for 20 minutes with the lid on, and then for another 10 minutes without the lid. And there you have it, two seemingly very different breads made from the same dough. Which one do you prefer? How many different breads have you tried to make from the same recipe? Do you have a favorite type of dough that you use for different bakes? And do you love cold fermentation just as much as I do? Because if you do, head over to the cold fermentation playlist. It is full of delicious recipes. If you want to get early access videos, click the join button on my channel. And if you're still here, please give me a thumbs up. So what do you think of this new and improved recipe? And have you tried the previous one? Let me know down in the comments. If you want to see videos like this one, click over here. Subscribe to the channel, click right here. That's all I have for you today. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.